Thank you all for coming to the talk. I wanted to start off by just saying thank you to Alex and all the team. It's been kind of a wish list of mine to be able to get to come to the conference, but to speak is a really great honor, so I'm very thankful to be here today. So today, I want to bring you all on a journey with me. Similar journey to the way that I started when I became working at the company that I work at today, Literati. So many times we look at litter and we have a question about what does it mean to you? To me, I didn't see it. It blended into the background. It was something that I passed by every day when I walked around or when I drove by it. I just kind of said, oh, look at that. Or I didn't even see it, right? Our brains get trained to just look past things and not even see it. So today I want to bring you on a journey and go through the same kind of journey that I went through where now I get to see the litter. So bringing the unseen to be seen. So this is also a talk where I want audience interaction, and there's a couple places. So if you're, software developers, you're not used to doing things during talks, please get ready because I'm going to ask for some interaction. All right, so I want to start off, and the audience, if you have things, just shout it out loud. What do you see in this picture? Cigarette butts, okay. A can of Red Bull, yeah. Yeah, okay, all kinds of things, right? But it's litter, right? It's the stuff that you see every day, or maybe you don't see, and you walk by it every day. And so what I want to talk about is what litter means to the world. So it's a global problem, and I want to use this bottle as an example. So one of my coworkers actually picked this up in Hawaii on a litter pickup at the beach in Hawaii. Now the problem with that is this bottle was from Malaysia. So it transported all the way from Malaysia to Hawaii and ended up in this state. So we're talking about a massive problem. And maybe the next couple slides are going to depress you a little bit, but I want you to get to understand the scope of the problem we're dealing with here. It's a global problem. So we have pictures of litter in our database from all over the world. Mongolia, Saudi Arabia, Fiji. There's no part of the globe that we don't have some idea of what litter looks like, and it looks different in every part of the world. But it doesn't even discriminate across famous places. This is from a research study we did right in front of the pyramids, where we found litter in front of the pyramids in Egypt. This was a litter that was picked up by our community member right in the middle of the Forbidden City in China, in Beijing. Everest Base Camp near India, Times Square. Something that you might recognize, some of the iconic the ground, right? Because these aren't pictures of the places, but what litter you walk by maybe when you go there. The Eiffel Tower. This is near where Nelson Mandela was wrongfully imprisoned for so many years in South Africa. This is the iconic mosaic ground near Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro with a cigarette butt proudly displayed right in the middle of it. Red Square in Moscow, Russia. The list goes on and on and on. We have almost every major city or monument in the world, we have litter that has been documented near it. It can be overwhelming. So pictures like this, if you've been in third world countries or places that are just even around here, right? Scenes like this can be overwhelming. And before I started working in this industry and seeing these pictures, it was numb to me. But now I can't unsee pictures like this, where on the side of the road, the litter that is dropped on the ground ends up in the waterways, ends up in piles, ends up in massive problems. So I also want to point out that it can even be artistic. And this image actually was the very first image that ended up in our database, that our founder snapped it on Instagram and what started our company. He added a hashtag literati to this picture, and then other people started doing it. And then eventually he was like, hey, we have a lot of information about where litter is in the world. I wonder if we could make a company out of this. So we actually did an artistic exhibit that traveled the country. I don't know if any of you saw it, but where we took the pictures of litter, and there was art made out of it. But the thing is, once you start kind of being involved, and once you see the unseen, and once you're exposed to the scale of the problem that exists, you see it everywhere, right? Does anyone want to take a guess where these pictures were from? There you go, outside. So yesterday I walked in between the 2 front doors and found 45 pieces of litter, right? So it's everywhere, and that's an area where, they're trying to keep it clean. So imagine what happens when they're not. So I want to talk about the scale, and this is where I want your interaction. So this is a picture of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So it is a floating island of trash in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Okay? And one of the things that we struggle with as a company is there's so many numbers and statistics and things that should demonstrate the problem to the world, but we struggle to figure out which is the one that is quite going to capture people's imaginations. And so you're going to be part of my experimentation today in a couple ways. This is one of them. I'm going to show you some statistics about this Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and I want you to raise your hand when you get it, when you understand the scope of what we're dealing with here, okay? All right. And just keep them raised. That would be great. So to understand the scale of this, that little blob on the right-hand side is North America, right? To understand the scale of this. So there are 5,250,000,000,000,000 pieces of litter estimated in the Great Garbage Patch, okay? Now that's about 15,000 per adult in the United States, okay? In some ways, they can't even, these are guesses because they can't study it. It's so thick. It's 1.6 million square kilometers, which is roughly the size of the country of Iran. Anybody? Okay, I've got most of you so far. All right, well, I'll get you on the next set of things, okay? But I mentioned it was the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. You can put your hands down. Sorry, thank you. I appreciate that, yes. I mentioned it was the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So am I just being coy with that? Well, no. There's one of them in each of our oceans. Not as big as the one in the Pacific. We as Americans hold the claim of the largest garbage patch, right? We like to be the biggest at everything. But there's one of these in every one of the major sort of places where the ocean congeals, right? And so this is just an incalculable problem. We just deal with huge numbers, and they just roll off our tongues, and we can't even grasp the scale of them, so we don't know where to start. But what we're trying to do is not solve the whole thing, but be a part of the solution. So there are real consequences to litter, okay? And I should have been clear at the beginning, I'm only talking about litter, not waste. So there's a difference there. The waste is the stuff that you put in your trash can and then it gets taken off. Right? Litter is everything that doesn't make it to the trash can, ends up on the ground, okay? So all of these statistics are just about litter, not about waste. That's a whole separate depressing conversation. So some of the consequences, and again, this is another opportunity for you to raise your hands when you feel like this hits me in a deep way, okay? Because there's a lot of really sobering statistics. Okay, and again, keep your hands up if you would. So 7 billion tons of litter goes into the oceans every year. 7 billion. 60% of that comes from litter. Not waste, litter. Just the stuff that gets dropped on the ground and eventually makes its way into the oceans. 1 million animals per year are estimated to die because of litter. Not because of waste, not because of pollution or all the other things that animals can run into, but just litter. So each cigarette butt that's littered takes 10 years to decompose from the time that it's dropped. And in Indonesia alone, we did a study, 100 billion cigarette butts are littered each year. Not smoked, littered. Much more are smoked. Okay? And they did a study in the United Kingdom where they studied how much got sort of thrown or blown out of cars and ended up on the sides of highways. 83 trash bags per mile was littered on the sides of highways. All right, and now, for the rest of you who haven't gotten your hands up yet, I'm speaking now to the people who are monetarily focused. So, in the United States alone, cities spend $200 billion a year on litter. Not waste, just litter, to mitigate it. That's roughly 3% of our federal budget, the equivalent of that. So it's equivalent to the transportation, parks, and NASA budgets combined. This is a big problem, folks. And then, if it haven't gotten you yet, that's enough to feed about 36 million people a year, according to the estimates of my local food bank. So we're talking about a really large problem with a lot of ramifications, and yet, with the scope of what we're dealing with, there's no data. There isn't anything that cities are able to really latch on to, well, except ours, hopefully, right, that helps solve this problem. All that money that I just mentioned was spent just however they could, without any sort of direct correlation or rationale, just throwing money at the problem. And they throw a lot of money at the problem. But what we're trying to provide is accurate data, so that cities and brands and NGOs and federal governments all around the world are able to make informed decisions to spend the money wisely to help mitigate this problem that we know exists, now all you know exists, but it's hard to do. So what do we see? Now, we're a technology company, and I'm speaking at a technology conference, so I'm going to pivot a little bit into the technology for a bit. So what do we see when we look at this image? We use a lot of computer vision to be able to look at this picture and identify what is in the picture, to understand not just that there was litter in that location where the picture was taken, but also what the composition was of the litter in the picture. So we have our own taxonomy that we describe litter. Yes, that's a thing. I didn't realize it was a thing before I started working in this industry, but it is. So we look at that Red Bull can, and it's not just a Red Bull can, it's not just crumpled, it's not just thrown on the ground, it's not just a piece of litter. We give it a category, a material, an object, and we even can recognize the brand off the can. We go further than that, and then we can also ascribe to it a weight and a volume and figure out what the parent company of the brand was and then in what category that brand mostly operates. And then since we work with groups and institutions all over the world, we correlate all of our information to, international taxonomies like CSIRO, which is the National Science Foundation equivalent in Australia, OSPAR, the European Union, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, there we go, got it, which is good old USA, and then organizations like Break Free from Plastic, who all have their own external taxonomies as well, so we can speak their language as well. Because we're dealing with a global problem, and so we have to speak globally. We don't just work in the United States, we work all over the world to try to solve this problem. So we have a ton of data, right? And so this picture was from our database as of August 5th, when we had 12 million. We have about 15 million pieces of litter documented today. And this map I could probably just leave up and just stare at together for a couple minutes because it's so fascinating to me. I actually have it on the wall of our office, and I look at it almost every day. And I find really interesting things in here. But we have a broad scope of data, but it's never enough. There's always more information that we can pull out, more places that we haven't quite seen. And when we deal with cities, there's a higher need for sort of more real-time data, right? Just understanding that there's litter there, well, they know that. They want to know, where do I go pick it up? So I'll deal with that in a second. So we have a lot of data, and a lot of that is due to our amazing community. Now, again, it's a world like, I was just talking with someone at lunch, there are worlds and problems that we don't interact with, so we don't know that they're there. And then when we get into the communities and we talk to people at conferences like this and we get to hear the problems, we get to see that there are amazing people doing amazing work all over the world. And we have an amazing community. So I was shocked to find out that there are people in our community, and we have an app that people can go and document litter. People pick up and document over 1,000 pieces of litter a day. All around the world, in 180 countries, we have users that go and make it their life's work to go and document the litter around their area to try to impact change. This is a group in Berlin. This is the mandatory cute kids picture from Singapore. But we have an amazing community that is enabling us to provide data to the world to help solve this problem. So we take that data and then we can correlate it with other data sets, and we can actually start to predict litter volume. This is the city of Moscow, where we did a recent study, and we were able to take the data that we figured out through our targeted research methodology, and we were able to correlate that and then create a predictive model to explore where we think the higher density of litter is in the city of Moscow. Again, the cities around the world that we interact with have nothing like this. They have no idea. They know there's litter, they know it's everywhere, but they don't know where it actually is. And so we're able to give them a data set that they can actually do something about and do something with. And so we can also do things like study policy impact. So as an example, the city of Austin, if they go and change their litter bins, sorry, I work with someone who's comes from England, and so they call them bins, but trash cans, okay? So if they change their type of trash can and they want to investigate, did that work? Or if they impose a new fine for a litter thing, how are they going to know if it works? Today, they don't. They just hope it does. They just say, well, I think there's less litter. I'm walking around the other day. It looked like I didn't see anything, so it's probably better. But we do targeted research studies in an area, and we, do a sampling methodology and a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not going to get into, but we take all of that information about what we found, and then we can explain to them, well, this is actually the impact of that policy. We can do before and after and get a really good picture of what the change was over time. And so already we've impacted policy. So our data in San Francisco led them to increase their cigarette tax. I don't know if any of you are smokers who are pretty upset by that, but our data allows them to generate about $4 million a year in tax revenue. In Philadelphia, students, who are some of my favorite users because they go out and they clean up all around their school and they're amazing. The data that they collected was then taken to the city of Philadelphia and used as justification to enact a citywide ban on plastic bags. In the Netherlands, we had one particular user who was sick and fed up with his favorite cough drop using a plastic wrapper, and went and documented hundreds of thousands of pieces of litter, and then went to the brand and took our data and then went to the brand and said, you need to change, and they did. So how do we do it? What do we do here? Well, like I mentioned before, we have a lot of computer vision behind the scenes. So we take a picture like this and we can identify where and with what confidence our model has to what type of litter is in the picture. And then from there, once we've determined where in a picture we have litter, we run it through a number of other models. So we have a model that detects global brands like Starbucks and Red Bull and McDonald's and Coca-Cola and you name it, right? We have pictures of litter from these brands literally all over the globe. But then we realized also that there needs to be regional brand models. So if you're like me and you're from the northeastern United States, or I'm from New England originally, the bottle on the left is very identifiable as a Poland Spring bottle, and in its state, crushed and on the ground, it's also very identifiable because there's a lot of them. And in the middle, if you're from the United Kingdom or from Eastern or Western Europe, you might recognize that as a Cadbury wrapper. And if you've been in India or a brand like Mazda might seem really familiar to you. But we've had to come up with different brand models for different regions of the world because litter looks different. And if we really want to understand the brand information to be able to attribute it to its proper source, we have to do a lot of different things. And then we also found out, or are continuing to find out, this is a ever-expanding industry and this problem expands every day that I work. We have location-specific models. So trash does not look the same in a picture everywhere in the world, right? This one is from the Netherlands. And there's a bike in the picture, which is very appropriate, I feel. But it has a different look than this one, which is from Pakistan. So we found this one out because we started doing research and our model was just not finding anything. And then we actually looked into it and realized, wait, this looks totally different. We have to change our models. So now we have location-specific models as well. So a lot of computer vision. So all of this boils down into, again, this is a technology conference, so let me talk tech with you for a while. Our pipeline. So when we ingest images, and at our highest rate during our Super Bowl, which just happened last month, well, actually, is it October yet? Yes, it's technically October, so last month is World Cleanup Day, which I know you all celebrated like I did. I celebrated making sure our systems didn't crash because we get about 30 images uploaded a second during the day. But when we take that image and we bring it and it gets uploaded to our system, we then use some queues and Lambda functions to be able to sort of like handle like large loads and buffering it into an SQS queue. And then we do some spam filtering. So this is where, human behavior is kind of what we do, right? We're talking about littering. I never really imagined that people would try to like spam our system. Seems weird, right? With a sort of philanthropic cause, like trying to, But then I found out that, there were groups that were offering cash prizes to people in different parts of the world, and so people were incentivized to spam. So we have a pretty significant spam filtering operation on the input to make sure that people aren't taking the same picture of litter like 20 times, using something fun called the Hamming distance. And so once we've determined that it's a valid litter record, then we can process sort of the initial intake, create a thumbnail, get it ready for display on our various apps and platforms. And then it gets into the fun bit. So once we've determined it's a proper image, once we've determined it's not spam, once we've determined it's a proper record, then we run it through like a step function that runs it through our initial model that creates sort of like bounding boxes for each piece of litter we've identified in the picture. And then for each of those pieces of litter, we run them through, depending on where it was picked up and depending on what type the model predicted it as, we run it through various other models. And so we use AWS step functions, as you can see in the diagram, to be able to handle that sort of logistical if, else, and flow traffic. And that all runs in parallel. And then once it's finished, we take all of the information from all the various models and we come up with our authoritative understanding of what's in that picture. So to make our final decision about if we think it's a can or if we think it's a bottle and what brand we think it is based on all of the input from our various models. And then we can actually publish it into storage, right? And so if you can imagine at scale, this process becomes very intensive and there's a lot of potential places for failure and people uploading images from all over the world. So, quality is different, people taking blurry pictures, people not having their location turned on. There's a whole bunch of error handling in the midst of this. This, even though it's complicated, is a vast oversimplification of all we have to do to figure out what if an image is valid and process it properly. So that's a little bit about how we take our images, how we process them, and then what we do to be able to turn them into litter data that then is used by our cities. So what's next? So when we look at this picture now, what are the things that we're working on trying to extract, right? We have a massive number of images, and we want to extract as much information as we can out of them. So what are we looking into? Well, one area that's fascinating for me is decomposition. So this is a picture of a cigarette butt decomposing over time. And as you can tell, it looks different as it decomposes. So one of the things we're trying to figure out is, can we train a model to recognize not only what the piece of litter in the image is, but also maybe how long it's been on the ground, right? So how long did it take a Starbucks cup to go from when it was in our hands and being drank to looking like this, right? We don't know. How long did it take the slug to find this McDonald's cup at home and be able to live inside of it? How long has that cup been on the ground? Why this is valuable is, imagine if you were a city and you knew that at one point in time there was litter, but when did it get there? And how long did it take it to be picked up, right? If we recognize that all of our litter records are relatively new, then maybe our pickup efforts are working. Versus if I find something like this, then nobody's cleaned up here in a very, very, very long time, right? But how long is that? And this is one of the fun things of working in this industry, because really no one else is doing this. We have to invent a lot of things. So we're having to figure out how we can invent a training set to be able to do this, right? Because we need data. We have a lot of pictures of trash. I mean, a lot of pictures of litter. One of the fun parts about this talk was actually combing through our database and trying to find some of these pictures. But what can we do to create something that's never been created before, to create a data set that nobody else has, right? So it's one of the fun parts of our job. The other thing is sort of alternative sources, right? Like, Imagine if you were a city, and instead of doing sort of our research methodology, which maybe does a couple times a year, maybe as much as once a month, looking at a city and understanding the litter composition on the ground. What if we attached cameras to garbage trucks and we got an understanding, daily as the trucks circled around picking up waste, what was on the ground at that point in time? We're also thinking about using drones as an alternative source to be able to get, a cheaper, more cost-effective way of similar kind of litter data to what we have today. Because it is expensive to pay researchers all over the globe, which is what we do, and to be able to, use that data, it becomes very expensive. And as you all know, cities don't have a lot of money, although they do spend a lot of money on this, but they don't have a lot of money to spend. So we're doing all this, right? And eventually what we want to get to is having a platform where cities can monitor their litter. So that they're not just shooting in the dark, they're not just sort of trying to make their best guess at what the problem is and how to fix it, but a way to sort of understand how their litter situation has changed over time and to provide them a platform to do just that, right? So that's where we're going and that's what we're building. And of course our end goal is so that these cities can sort of see the unseen and then ideally fix it. So that's our talk. You can join us and go and download our app and become a member of our community and help us out. Also hiring, the obligatory hiring slide, right? You gotta throw at least one of these in there. And so we're hiring Node, React, native mobile, a lot of computer vision, data analysts, et cetera. And so that's my talk. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them now. That's a good point. Yeah, we have a lot of our database that we can't get brand information out of, to be honest with you, because either the piece has degraded so much, or especially in the case of marine litter, it's been deconstructed beyond recognition, right? We also have a lot of things in our database that don't have brand information easily identifiable. Like we can get some cigarette butts if the wrapper is still on the outside of the plastic bit, but a lot of cigarette butts we don't have brand information. So in that case, we usually internally use the adage, some data is better than none. So we're happy that we got something about it, right? Because today they have no idea about what's happening. So yeah, it's a good question though. So have we seen the usages of the app be sort of, maybe if I can summarize your question, sort of co-located in certain like economic areas? Is that kind of what you're getting at? Or certain population centers?
So, like the broken window.
Yeah. Okay. So like the broken window theory, so if you see more litter, then you're going to litter more, that kind of a thing? Yeah. We have a behavioral scientist on our staff, Dr. Natalie Hollinger, a little shout out, and she is studying things like that, right? That's part of the science that's not yet sure. We don't really know why people litter, right? The idea, though, about sort of correlating that with our app data and what we find is really interesting. It's something that, is possible because there's a data set, right? Outside of the data set that we have and that we were creating for cities, there isn't really a possibility to even begin that process. But it is something that, we use data sets like, population density and that kind of stuff and human traffic patterns to use to influence our models. I don't know if that's exactly your question. Was that follow-up or was that? Okay. Yeah. We're always looking for a really good data set to correlate to ours, but it's yet another thing that there isn't really a clear even research on, so we're trying to figure that out too. Yes, up front? Oh, how many types of litter there are? We have, let's see, right now in our current taxonomy, we have about 46 different object types that we can recognize from a picture for the objects. Now, This might be amazing. And the community and just the people that are in this area are just amazing people. So there's one guy who actually did his PhD thesis on creating a taxonomy of trash that is the most detailed, structured, hierarchical look at all of the different types of litter that exist. And so, yes, there is a taxonomy out there. Honestly, at this point, we're just trying to do the best we can with the ones that are easily identifiable, because there's a lot, like, if you've ever heard of a nurdle, which is a little tiny piece of plastic that shows up a lot of the times in oceans, people really want to try to figure it out, but if you try to train a model to find a little dot of plastic that looks like, the size of like a peppercorn, it's really hard. So as much as I'd love to train a model to do something like that, today that's just a little bit, a bridge too far today. Yes?
Do you mind mentioning who that person is?
Yeah, Wynn Cowger was his name. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, how do we know? That's a great question. How do we know that the images ingested by the system and run through the models are unique? That was your question? That's a fantastic question. It's actually really hard. So I mentioned right now there's some really simple things that we can do, like looking at sort of the timestamps or the hash of an image to see if it's exactly the same. But there's also something called the Hamming distance that would allow you to look at two images to determine similarity and get a score of similarity between two images to see if it matches it. Now, using that formula at scale is another set of problems that we're currently trying to figure out. But there's a lot of different opportunities there. Yeah. If you come work with us, you can help me solve that problem. That would be great. Yes, up front. Yeah. So, yes. So we can always get, with any spam detection, right? As soon as you put up like a marker, someone's going to figure out a way around it, right? That's just human nature. So right now, we're focusing on a single user's information, right? So just making sure that one person doesn't just send 50 pictures of the same thing. But yeah, I'm sure we could be more sophisticated. Right now, it's, trying to get the least minimum viable product of what we can get running. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the question was, and again, if I'll try to repeat it, was, how do we handle the fact that our data sets are incomplete or maybe biased towards users that pick up in the same general area over and over again? Yeah. So our community data is flawed, right? So the data that we get from our overall community is flawed in general. So that's why we do our targeted research studies, and we've done research studies in 50 cities all around the globe, and then 10 in the United States, trying to create baseline comparisons between our community data and the scientifically sort of proven and statistically relevant data, and then sort of using those two to validate each other, so to speak, right? Again, I'm drastically oversimplifying it, but that's basically the answer to your question, yeah. So it's a known problem, but yes, I love my community, right? It's still amazing that we have people that do this. Yes? Yeah, so have we seen or been able to track the rising homeless population, particularly on the West Coast? That was your question? Yeah. So our data set can be used by cities in a lot of ways. I know for a fact that there are a number of cities that we're talking to about using our data set to understand what they term as illegal dumping, right? But you might call as homeless waste. That's an ongoing use of our data, and people have found value in using it in that way. But in many ways, we are the creator of the data set. How people use it and what the sort of uses are kind of it's so specific. Each city has their own things that they care about, right? Some cities might be really focused on waterways and leakage into waterways. Other ones might be more on illegal dumping. Other ones might have, a large tourist population, and they really care about the litter, density and composition in their touristy areas. So depending on where we talk in the world, every city has their own set of problems. And so we're trying to create a ground truth data set to allow cities to then use it in ways that they can to solve their problems. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so if we're recognizing particularly brands, I think is your question, right? Because a can is a can is a can, right? But as far as brand, how do we handle when people sort of change their design of their packaging? Is that your question? Yeah. Yeah, I wish I could say that we had a nightly batch script that ran and like pinged us on our pagers when, oh, the brand changed their packaging. We're not there yet. I would love it to, but one thing that we found actually is that our model does a really good job. So if you remember the slide that had the Starbucks cup, that doesn't look like an iconic Starbucks cup, but our model actually did a really good job of predicting it because Starbucks cups, although they might be different, I'm just using them as an example, no shade on Starbucks, although they do produce a lot of litter. A Starbucks cup kind of, even though it has slightly different appearances, they all kind of look the same, right? Brand cohesion is the marketing term, right? So that actually helps us out a lot. So yeah, it is a problem, but again, like, we have so many problems to solve out of the scope of all of them. If we miss a couple new packaging, it's not the end of the world for us. Yes, on the back there. Yeah. How did we start? I mean, it was that picture of the cigarette butt, right? That's how we started, where our founder took that and put it on Instagram with a tag literati, and then other people started doing it. Yeah, I mean, that's how we started, and then it's just become kind of, a global movement. People really buying into the concept. Because I think, like, if you speak to the people, and I'm not going to ascribe their motivation, but if you speak to the people who go and pick up 1,000 pieces of trash a day, they're really motivated to see change. I hear it every day, right? Our users, I love our users, but they are passionate, right? Like, they want their data to be used to fix the problems that they see and they pick up every day. And so, yeah, it starts from I didn't say the question. How did it get started? That was the question. Okay. But users, really want to see the impact, and that's what we want to provide, right? And so it's a balancing act between what we can achieve today versus what we know we will be able to achieve in the future. Yeah, so one of the other things that didn't make it onto our slides is trying to also have another model to be able to determine recyclability of an item that we recognize. That is also another large problem in the sense that, how can I say this? So, like the 1 through 8 plastic scale, right? Like, very few people actually know what that actually has anything to do with, right? And the fact that a lot of that just means it can't be recycled, not that, anyway. But how do I track things like the usage of biodegradable materials? A lot of it turns into sort of a time series look at our object and material compositions that we see. So if we see a lot of cups moving from a higher incidence of the combination of cup and plastic versus cup and paper, we can determine some of those trends. But again, today, cities are dealing with a massive problem, and that level of nuance is lost on most people so far, right? So we've done some of that look into it, but honestly, no, it's like shouting into an empty room. Like, people are like, I have bigger problems than if they're changing that, It would be great too, but I think people have a lot bigger problems to solve for it. So, all right, I think 2:20 was my ending time, right? Yes? Okay. All right, I'm up here if anyone has more questions, but thank you for your time.